Chapter 1. The bridge of the Resolute hummed with a tense stillness, a thin veil of calm before the storm. Captain Elius Jenson stood at the panoramic viewport, his eyes fixed on the vast expanse of space beyond. Earth's silhouette hung in the distance, a fragile orb of blue and green, untouched by the violence that had consumed so many worlds before it. For a moment, Elius allowed himself to appreciate the peace they had earned, peace that had been hard-won through decades of diplomacy and sacrifice. The quiet was shattered by the shrill cry of the alarm. A sharp, metallic tone echoed through the ship, jarring everyone from their stations. Elius straightened, his pulse quickening. The suddenness of it felt wrong, instinctively off. He reached for the comms button. "Captain, we've got a situation." The voice of Lieutenant Sarah Vallon came through, crackling with urgency. "What's happening, Lieutenant?" Elius asked, his calm tone masking the unease gnawing at his gut. "We're receiving strange signals, sir. They're not ours, and they're coming from the edge of the system. We're trying to trace their origin." Before Elius could respond, the viewport before him flickered. A series of blinding flashes erupted across the sky, too close to be ignored. The first wave hit Earth's orbital defenses. It was swift, clinical, a series of pinpoint strikes. Satellites winked out, communication relays fell silent, and deep within the core of Earth's infrastructure, systems began to fail. "Lieutenant, can you confirm this is a coordinated attack?" Elius demanded, his voice sharp now. "It's not a drill, Captain. Whatever this is, it's not something we've ever seen before." Elius' heart raced. For years, humanity had been preparing for the unexpected. Potential incursions, alien uprisings, and rogue factions within the Galactic Council. But nothing had prepared them for this. "Sound general quarters," Elius ordered, his voice unwavering. "All hands to battle stations." The command was almost instinctive, a reflex honed by years of service. But this felt different. The crew moved with urgency, but even the most seasoned officers couldn't hide the concern on their faces. Elius had seen many battles, but this was different. A few moments later, a figure stepped into the command center. It was Admiral Kira Hall, Earth's highest-ranking officer. She looked shaken, her usual stoic demeanor replaced with a rare, visible concern. "Captain, the initial scans, it's not just a random attack. This is strategic. Whoever is doing this has been planning for a while," she said, her voice tight. "We've lost most of the orbital defenses. Communications are failing, and Earth's ground systems are next." Elius gripped the edge of his command station, staring at the main screen, watching the destruction unfold in real time. He clenched his fists. "Is there a chance to fight back?" he asked, his voice hoarse despite the calm. Hall shook her head. "We don't have the resources." The fleet was stationed on the other side of the system, preparing for the upcoming trade routes. "They'll be hours away." "What about the Galactic Council?" Elius said, his frustration mounting. "They've got to have something in place for this." There was a long pause. The Admiral's eyes flicked to the communications panel, where messages were pouring in from various council representatives. "They're not responding, Captain," she said. "Not like we hoped." Elius felt a surge of frustration, tinged with anger. The Galactic Council had always been a distant, indifferent body, more concerned with politics than practical defense. And now, it seemed, they had abandoned Earth at the worst possible time. A voice from behind interrupted their conversation. "Captain, you need to see this." It was Lieutenant Vallon again, her tone grim. Elius turned sharply. She motioned toward the secondary screen, which displayed a real-time feed of Earth's surface. The footage was shaky, but unmistakable. Fleets of unknown ships, sleek and menacing, gliding silently toward Earth. Their design was alien, something they had never seen before. Weapons mounted on the ships glowed with a dark, almost unnatural energy, the technology too advanced for anything Earth had ever encountered. "Who are they?" Hall muttered, almost to herself. "And how did they get this close?" The ships loomed closer, taking up more space on the screen. Elius narrowed his eyes. He had never seen ships like these. He had heard rumors, whispers of a faction, an empire, rising in the galaxy, but it had always been something distant. something theoretical. Until now, Elius's gut twisted. He didn't need to ask who they were. He had a terrible feeling he knew. Galactic Empire, he muttered under his breath. Sir, Hall asked, her brow furrowing. The Yrdil Empire, Elius confirmed. They're ships. They've been making quiet moves for years, but no one took them seriously. We thought the reports were exaggerated. But this, he trailed off, his voice bitter. They've come to finish what they started. The Yrdil Empire had always considered humanity weak, an intergalactic afterthought. Their philosophy had been simple. Earth's position in the Galactic Council was a mistake. The Yrdil Empire believed they had the right to dominate, to control the weaker species of the galaxy. Give me the Council, Elius said, his voice cold. We need backup now. Hall hesitated. Captain, there's nothing they can do. Not this time. Elius looked at her, his eyes hardening. They'll respond. They have to. As if on cue, the comms panel flickered to life. The hologram of a council member, a tall, elegant figure from the Xantha race, appeared on the screen. Captain Jenson. The voice was smooth, almost detached. We are aware of the situation. Earth's position is delicate. We advise. Advise? Elius cut him off. You advise while my planet is under attack? You've known about the Yrdil threat for years. Do you really think you can just sit back and let them wipe us out? The council members stiffened, and for a moment, Elius saw a flicker of hesitation. Then, the image blurred, and the figure was replaced by another, a dark-skinned, heavily armored representative from the Duran race. His voice was firm, authoritative. Captain, this is an issue that requires a more measured approach, the Duran said, his expression impassive. We can't afford to take action recklessly. Earth's situation is precarious. Perhaps it's time to reconsider the Council's previous stance on Earth's. Enough, Elius roared, his patience finally breaking. I don't need your political games. I need action. Now, the comms crackled. The representative fell silent, his image glitching out, replaced by static. Elius turned away from the screen, his jaw clenched. His crew was silent. He knew what they were thinking. The Council would do nothing. They had always been more concerned with their own agendas than with the survival of humanity. It was up to them now. Prepare the fleet, Elius ordered. We fight or we die. And in that moment, he realized there was no turning back. The battle for Earth's survival had begun. Chapter 2. The air on the Resolute felt heavier now. The sharp hum of the command center's lights seemed to echo in Elius' ears, mixing with the distant vibrations of the ship's engines. It wasn't the familiar hum of routine anymore. It was a constant reminder of the weight on his shoulders. The blast of alarms from earlier still lingered in the background, a constant tension that hadn't released. Elius sat at the command table, hands clenched into fists, eyes fixed on the vastness of space displayed on the central monitor. Earth was visible in the distance, a fragile sphere of blue and green, hanging in the void. The weight of responsibility pressed harder with every passing second. We've identified the enemy, Captain. Lieutenant Sarah Vallen's voice cut through the silence, though she didn't look up from the screen in front of her. They're not some rogue faction. This is something much bigger. Elius stiffened. What are we dealing with, Lieutenant? Vallen turned her chair toward him. Her face was pale, and her hands were shaking slightly as she adjusted the data feed. A series of holographic images flickered to life before Elius, showing the sleek, angular shapes of the enemy ships. They were nothing like anything Earth had ever encountered, their design predatory and unfamiliar. They're Yrdil, Vallen said, her voice low, almost reverent with fear. Elius' breath hitched. He had heard the rumors, the whispers in dark corners of the galaxy, but he had never truly believed they would make a move this bold. The Yrdil Empire had always been distant, an abstract threat in the minds of many. Their power was rumored to be vast, their reach terrifying, but to think they'd come for Earth? He couldn't fathom it. Yrdil, Elius repeated, the word heavy with the weight of history. Ow! Vallen swallowed. It's their ships. They've modified their technology in ways that shouldn't be possible. They've been preparing for this for years, probably since Earth first entered the Galactic Council. Elius stood, pacing the small space of the command center, hands on his hips. He thought back to the Council's meetings, the countless debates about Earth's position within the greater galactic order. Some had supported humanity's integration, while others had viewed them with disdain. Earth was young, naive even, in the eyes of the galaxy. But it was precisely that which had kept them safe for now. Why now? Elius muttered. Why attack us now? Valen's fingers danced over the controls, her eyes narrowing as she pulled up a transmission. There's more, Captain. The Yrdil's message, it's not just an attack. They're making a statement. The hologram flickered again, and Elius found himself face to face with an image of a tall, humanoid figure. His skin was a dark, mottled green. His eyes glowed with an almost otherworldly light. The figure's features were sharp, alien in every sense of the word. This was no ordinary leader. This was Velkrin Zoth, supreme leader of the Yrdil Empire. His expression was calm, cold even, as if delivering a simple briefing on a political matter. I am Velkrin Zoth. The voice crackled through the ship's speakers, chilling Elius to his core. Your time in the Galactic Council is over. Earth's existence is a mistake we will correct. You are nothing more than a blip in the grand scheme of the galaxy, and it is time that you were removed. Elius' hand tightened on the edge of the table. His instincts told him to shut down the feed, to reject this message, but he knew better. This was not just a declaration of war. It was a message designed to break humanity's spirit before the battle even began. I've heard your plea, Velkrin continued, his tone as smooth as polished stone, but the Yrdil will no longer tolerate the weak and the unworthy. Prepare for your extinction. The transmission cut off abruptly, leaving a haunting silence in its wake. The room seemed to shrink, as if the very walls were closing in around Elius. He wasn't sure if it was the gravity of the situation or the coldness in Velkrin's voice, but something inside him shifted. They're not just invading, Captain. They're making an example of us, Valen said, her voice tight. Earth's position in the Galactic Council has always been under scrutiny. The Yrdil have made it clear that we're not seen as equals. We're nothing to them. Elius clenched his jaw, fighting the impulse to lash out. Every fiber of his being screamed at him to fight, to stand and show that Earth would not be bowled over. But deep down, he knew they were outmatched. The Yrdil were far beyond their capabilities. Earth's fleet, though strong, was nowhere near prepared for the kind of warfare the Yrdil excelled at. So what now? Hall's voice came from behind him, cutting through the tension like a blade. She stepped forward, her face grim. We can't hold out forever. Elius turned to her, his gaze steely. We fight. We gather every ship, every resource we have. We hold Earth as long as possible. Hall shook her head. That's not going to be enough, Elius. We need something more. Elius met her eyes, the unspoken fear reflected in both their faces. They had no reinforcements. The rest of the fleet was too far out, and even if they did make it back in time, they'd be arriving to a world already on the brink of collapse. The Yrdil Empire's superior technology would tear through Earth's defenses like paper. I won't give up, Elius said, his voice steady, though doubt gnawed at him. We don't know their full strength. We still have a chance to disrupt their advance. Valen's fingers flew over her console, bringing up a tactical map of Earth's defenses. It's not much, but there are weak points. The Yrdil ships rely on a centralized control system. If we can get close enough to their flagship, we might be able to disable it. Elius nodded slowly, piecing the plan together in his mind. We'll need to be fast. We'll need to hit them where they're most vulnerable. The fleet won't be able to help us directly, but we can use the element of surprise. Hall frowned. You're talking about a suicide mission. I'm talking about a chance to make them bleed, Elius replied, his voice hardening. We won't just go down without a fight, not without making them regret it. For a brief moment, the room fell silent. The gravity of what they were discussing hung in the air like a storm cloud, each decision more desperate than the last. Elius turned back to the screen, his eyes locking onto the still image of the Yrdil fleet. The warships glinted menacingly, massive and unstoppable. They had come for Earth, and they had made their intentions clear. But they had underestimated one thing. Humanity was not easily broken. We start now, Elius said, his voice low but determined. Prepare the fleet for battle. And tell the crew, we're not just defending Earth. We're fighting for our survival. We fight to show the galaxy we're worthy. We fight to remind them that Earth does not kneel. As the orders spread, the Resolute hummed with renewed purpose. The first shots had been fired. The battle for Earth's future had begun. Chapter 3. The atmosphere in the command center of the Resolute was dense with anticipation. The crew, once poised and confident, now moved with a sense of urgency that betrayed their nervousness. Elius stood at the front of the room, surveying the flickering holograms of Earth's defenses and the looming threat of the Yrdil Empire. He had expected resistance, but this was different. Captain, Lieutenant Sarah Vallon said, her voice cutting through the tension. We've received a communication from the Galactic Council. Elius turned, his gaze hard. The Council had been silent ever since the initial attack. Their inaction was beginning to gnaw at him, but he had no time for diplomacy now. They needed to act. Put it through, he ordered. The large hollow projector in front of him blinked to life, displaying a cold, emotionless figure. A tall, angular being with dark blue skin, his eyes glowing faintly with the flicker of an advanced intellect. This was Velos, a representative from the Hesperan race, one of the most influential members of the Galactic Council. Captain Jenson, Velos began, his voice smooth and composed. We are aware of the situation unfolding on Earth. The Council is currently in deliberation regarding the proper course of action. Deliberation? Elius snapped. My planet is under attack, and you're deliberating? The Yrdil are invading, and Earth is about to fall. We need your support now. Velo's expression remained unchanged. We understand your distress, Captain. However, the Yrdil's motives are still unclear. The Council must assess the broader implications before any action is taken. Elius could feel the anger bubbling up inside him. What implications? His voice cracked with frustration. Our existence is being threatened. If the Yrdil succeed, the balance of power in the galaxy will shift irreparably. There are political considerations, Velos said, his tone still measured. If Earth falls, it may alter the power dynamics within the Council. The risk of escalation is considerable. We are weighing our options. Elius clenched his fists. Political considerations? While Earth fought for its life, the Council was concerned about its own stability. He swallowed the bitter taste of that realization, forcing himself to remain calm. This was not the time for an outburst. Do you even hear yourself? Elius said, his voice icy now. The Yrdil have been planning this for years. We've known they would make a move eventually. And now they're here, attacking us. And you want to talk about politics? Velos paused, as if processing Elius' words. Then, he spoke again, though his voice was colder this time. Captain, your desperation is understandable. However, the Council has protocols to follow. We cannot act impulsively. I'm done waiting for the Council, Elius said, turning off the transmission with a decisive motion. If they won't help, we'll fight this on our own. Captain, Hall's voice came from behind him, hesitant. We need to consider all our options. If we go against the Council, we don't have a choice, Elius interrupted, spinning to face her. They've left us to die, Hall. They're sitting on their hands while the Yrdil burn everything we've worked for. She fell silent, her face tight with a mix of frustration and helplessness. So what's the plan? She asked, her tone resolute. We take the fight to them. We don't have a fleet capable of going toe-to-toe with the Yrdil directly, Elius replied, pacing across the room. We need to disrupt their command structure. If we can strike their flagship, we might have a chance to cripple their advance. And how do you propose we get close enough? Hall asked, crossing her arms. The Yrdil will never let us within range. They'll destroy us first. Elius paused, a plan beginning to form in his mind. We don't need to take the entire fleet head-on. We need to hit them where they're weakest, their control systems. Their fleet is a finely tuned machine, but every machine has its vulnerabilities. He turned to Vallon, who was already inputting coordinates in her console. Lieutenant, gather all the intel we have on Yrdil ship systems. I want to know everything about their flagship. Weak points. Power grids. Anything we can exploit. Valen nodded, her fingers moving rapidly across the console. It'll take some time to gather all the data, Captain, but I'll get you something. Elius turned to Hall. We'll need a team to infiltrate their flagship, take out their control center, and disrupt their coordination. This will be a one-shot deal. We either succeed, or we're all dead. Hall's eyes met his, her expression unreadable for a moment. Then, she nodded firmly. I'll assemble the team. But, Captain, this could be a suicide mission. Are we prepared for that? We don't have any other options, Elius replied. We can't sit back and wait to die. We're going to make them regret underestimating us. As he spoke, the full weight of his words settled over him. He wasn't just rallying his crew. He was asking them to sacrifice everything, to risk everything, for a chance to save their planet, their future. The tension in the room was thick, but it was also charged with something else, determination. There was no going back now. Hours passed, and Elius watched as his crew scrambled to prepare. The Resolute's remaining forces were being readied, and small teams were assembling. He stood in the command center, his mind racing. Every minute felt like an hour, each decision more crucial than the last. Valen's data came through in fragments, slowly at first, and then in a more complete form. Captain, we've located the Yrdil flagship's central command hub, she reported. There's a secondary control room that's isolated from the rest of the ship. If we can infiltrate it, we'll have a chance to disable their communication systems. Elius studied the map she presented, noting the location of the control room. It was deep within the heart of the ship, heavily guarded and almost certainly booby-trapped. But it was their only shot. Good. Give me a team ready, Elius said. We go in as soon as possible. As the mission plans came together, Elius allowed himself only a brief moment of reflection. The council's indifference stung, but it had also ignited something in him, a fire that refused to be extinguished. Humanity had fought for its place in the galaxy for centuries. It wasn't going to lose that place now, not without one hell of a fight. Captain, Hall said, approaching him once more. We're ready. Elius looked at her, meeting her steady gaze. Then let's show them what happens when they try to wipe us out. As the team prepared to leave, Elius took one last look at Earth. The planet was in the crosshairs, but as long as he was alive, he wouldn't let it fall. The fight had only just begun. Elius' heart raced, but his mind was naturally quiet. This was for a brief moment. The fate of Elius stood on the bridge of humanity, Resolute, rested on the hands gripping the cold surface of the command table. Elius muttered under his breath. The ship's engines a distant vibration beneath. The fight had begun. The ship's forward viewport displayed a brilliant, expansive void. Earth, a faint blue and green orb, spun slowly beneath them. His planet, his people, all of it hanging in the balance. But now, it wasn't just Earth at risk. It was their very right to exist in the galaxy. Humanity had been underestimated, disregarded by the higher powers. The Yrdil Empire had made its move, and the time for diplomacy had long passed. The battle had arrived, and there would be no turning back. Captain, the Yrdil flagship is within range, Lieutenant Valen reported, breaking his reverie. Her fingers hovered over the console, inputting data at lightning speed. The tension in her voice wasn't lost on him. Her words were sharp, but there was an undercurrent of fear there, as there should be. Elius didn't look at her. His eyes were still fixed on the Earth. What's our window? 5 minutes. Tops. After that, they'll be in full control of the planet's orbit, and we'll be sitting ducks, Valen answered. A shiver ran down Elius' spine, but he kept his focus. Do we have a shot at their primary communication node? There's a chance, Valen said, her voice tinged with skepticism. But Captain, the flagship's defenses are unlike anything we've faced before. Even with our best tech, we're talking about a direct assault. We'll be on their radar before we even get close. Elius turned slowly, locking eyes with her. We've never been good at doing things the easy way. Get me close enough, and I'll take care of the rest. Valen nodded, but didn't meet his gaze again. Her hands moved across the panel, confirming the approach vectors, the trajectory of their assault, and the countdown to impact. She knew the odds were slim. So did he. The rest of the bridge crew worked in silence. each person absorbed in their task, the weight of their duty hanging thick in the air. Elius' mind raced, calculating the potential outcomes, each more grim than the last. Yet, there was no time for second-guessing. He couldn't afford to let doubt creep in. "Admiral," Elius said, turning to Hall, who stood near the command station, her face set in determined lines. "Ready the assault teams. We're not just hitting them with one strike. We'll need multiple teams working at once. Divide them into groups, get them aboard the Yrdil flagship as soon as possible. I want their communications down, their navigation systems offline. Everything that makes their fleet coordinated must be destroyed." Hall's expression tightened, and her jaw set firm. "Aye, Captain. We'll have them ready within 2 minutes." Elius nodded. The stakes were clear. This wasn't about winning the battle. It was about making the Yrdil pay for their arrogance. Humanity's survival depended on disrupting the Yrdil's ability to communicate, to coordinate their attack. If they could stop that, Earth would have a fighting chance. If not, they were doomed. The Resolute shot through the dark void of space, its engines roaring with power as it tore toward the heart of the Yrdil fleet. The distance between them was closing rapidly, but each passing second felt like an eternity. Elius stood in the center of the bridge, his mind honed in on the task ahead. The stars streaked past them, a blur of white lights, while Earth grew ever smaller behind them. 5 minutes, Valen announced once more, her voice steady but sharp. The countdown was ticking. Every second was precious. Elius watched the Yrdil flagship grow larger on the tactical map. It was an imposing structure, sleek, armored, a true representation of the Empire's superiority complex. His thoughts briefly drifted to the words Velkrin Zoth had spoken. Asterisk, Earth's existence is a mistake. Asterisk, a bitter taste formed in his mouth. If the Yrdil thought they could crush humanity with ease, they were gravely mistaken. "Prepare for evasive maneuvers," Elius barked. "We'll breach their perimeter and force a hole. We'll go in a high speed. No time for subtlety." The bridge crew worked quickly, maneuvering the ship through the enemy lines with a mixture of skill and desperation. As they neared the flagship, Elius could hear his heart pounding in his chest. Every instinct told him they were heading directly into the lion's den. They were outgunned, outnumbered, and possibly already marked for destruction. But they were Earth's last hope, and they weren't going to go quietly. In the dark recesses of the Yrdil flagship, the enemy prepared. Velkrin Zoth, the leader of the invasion, stood in his command center, a cold expression on his face as he surveyed the movements of his fleet on the tactical readouts. His mind was already calculating his next steps. He had been in battle countless times before, and there was no fear in his gaze, only the anticipation of crushing another weak species under the might of his empire. Then, an alert blinked on the console. A red dot appeared on the flagship's sensor grid. "Earth's fleet. So, it begins," Velkrin muttered, his voice devoid of emotion. A subordinate approached him. "Lord Velkrin, the humans are closing fast. They're taking an aggressive course, intending to engage us head-on." Velkrin's lips curled into a slight smile. "Let them come. We've waited long enough for this moment. They will know their place." He turned his back to the screen. "Initiate the countermeasures. Prepare for their assault. Let them feel the full force of the Yrdil Empire." Back aboard the Resolute, the tension reached a fever pitch. "Captain, they're locking onto us," Valen shouted. "They're preparing to fire." Elius' mind snapped into action. He was already calculating the next move. Evasive action. Now, the ship lurched violently as it swerved to avoid the incoming fire. Laser blasts seared through the space where they had been moments ago. Explosions erupted around them, sending tremors through the hull of the Resolute. The ship rocked with the force of a near miss, and Elius was thrown off balance for a split second. "Get us closer." "Now," he yelled. The crew fought to regain control of the ship, and in a sudden surge of speed, they broke through the enemy line. The flagship loomed large in front of them, and the moment had arrived. There was no turning back. "Go! Go!" Elius shouted as he sprang from the command center and made his way toward the hangar bay. The assault teams boarded their fighter craft, their suits sealed, weapons ready. As Elius climbed into his own fighter, the weight of what they were about to do hung heavily on his shoulders. He turned to his crew. Remember, we're not just fighting for survival. We're fighting for everything. If we don't stop them here, Earth falls. With that, the doors closed, and the fighters rocketed out into the void. The Resolute continued its high-speed maneuvers as Elius and his team made their way toward the flagship. Their small fleet darted through space, every move calculated for speed and precision. The flagship's powerful defenses were closing in, but they had already committed to the attack. There was no second chance. As they approached, the vastness of the Yrdil flagship consumed everything. The monstrous structure seemed to breathe with a life of its own. Weapons fired across the distance, and the battle began in earnest. Chapter 5: The roar of the Resolute's engines faded into the vacuum of space as Elius and his team raced toward the heart of the Yrdil flagship. Every moment was a calculated risk, and every breath seemed to count more than the last. The fighters soared in tight formation, the enemy's countermeasures flashing dangerously close as beams of energy whizzed past them. Elius's hands gripped the controls tightly, every nerve focused on the path ahead. There was no room for error. This was their one chance. "Captain, the central docking bay is up ahead." Lieutenant Sarah Vallen's voice crackled through the comms. "We have to breach it before the Yrdil's reinforcements arrive." Elius glanced at the display, the bay growing larger in his sights. The ship was a behemoth, massive, ominous, and cloaked in a haze of deadly weapons. Yet in that moment, it seemed less invincible. It was nothing more than a target. He pressed a button on the console, his voice tight with focus. "Everyone, stay sharp. We're going in fast." The fighters' engines roared as they surged forward, closing the gap between them and the enormous Yrdil vessel. Elius's eyes flickered between his targeting system and the dark expanse around him. The massive docking bay loomed ahead, flanked by reinforced shields and heavily armed turrets. As they neared, the space filled with blinding flashes of light. Explosions rained down on them, the force rattling the hull of their fighters. A blast hit the rear of one of their smaller ships. The fighters spiraled out of control before vanishing into the void, consumed by the force of the explosion. "Pull up," Elius shouted over the comms. He wrenched the controls to the right, narrowly avoiding a blast that would have torn them apart. His pulse hammered in his ears as he pushed the ship forward, the small cockpit vibrating with the strain. Sweat beaded on his forehead, but he didn't hesitate. The moment of impact was coming. Vallen's voice came through, steady despite the chaos. "We're within range, Captain. Ready to breach." Elius's hand clenched around the throttle. "Do it." The fighters rocketed toward the Yrdil flagship's docking bay, the enemy's defenses flaring up one last time. In one split second, Elius pressed the launch button, and the breaching charge tore through the outer shields. The resulting explosion sent shockwaves through space, the sound muffled, but its impact all too real. "Move, move," Elius barked. The fighters plunged through the gap, the docking bay doors shuddering as they breached. Inside, a world of alien architecture opened up, a cavernous interior bathed in harsh, cold light. The Yrdil ship's alien technology was everywhere, a testament to the Empire's advanced capabilities. As they touched down, Elius's feet hit the metal floor of the flagship. His boots clanged against the surface as he quickly unstrapped himself from the seat and readied his weapon. His team followed, their steps fast and determined. Every second was vital. "Status," Elius said to Hall, who was already unbuckling herself from the fighter's seat beside him. "We've secured the landing bay," Hall said, her voice low and determined. "We're in." The team filed out quickly, moving swiftly through the dim-lit corridors of the ship. The metallic scent of the Yrdil flagship filled the air. The eerie hum of their technology surrounded them, as if the ship itself was alive, breathing in time with their footsteps. But there was no time to dwell on that. The enemy was everywhere, and their mission was clear: disable the flagship's command center before it could retaliate. "Keep it tight," Elius ordered as they moved in a coordinated line, weapons raised. "No mistakes." Their boots echoed in the hallway as they advanced toward their target. It felt like they were in enemy territory for an eternity. It was only minutes before they arrived at the reinforced doors of the command center. The team paused, eyes fixed on the entrance, scanning for any sign of movement. The door was locked with Yrdil encryption, but Valen quickly pulled up her portable hacking device, her fingers moving like lightning. "They won't know we're here until it's too late," Valen muttered, her face set with focus. "Just get it open," Elius replied, his tone sharp. He could feel the weight of every passing second pressing on him. The countdown was already ticking. The Yrdil would not let them have this small victory without a fight. Seconds felt like minutes as Valen worked, her breath coming in shallow gasps. Finally, with a soft click, the doors slid open. The command center was ahead, a vast chamber with Yrdil officers standing in front of holographic control panels. Their sharp features and alien movements reminded Elius that they were facing more than just soldiers. They were confronting a force that had conquered countless worlds. Without a word, Elius and his team burst into the room, weapons raised. The Yrdil officers reacted quickly, but they were too slow. A burst of fire rang out as Elius's team took down the nearest guards, the blinding flashes of energy disintegrating their enemies on contact. "Secure the perimeter," Hall shouted, her weapon flashing as she took down another officer. Elius moved quickly, scanning the room. His heart pounded, not from fear, but from the cold, focused need to destroy the Yrdil's ability to coordinate. He reached the central command station, his hands moving with practiced precision as he keyed in the shutdown sequence. But as he worked, a voice interrupted him, one he had been dreading. It was cold, emotionless, but filled with a sinister command. "Well done, Captain," came the voice of Velkrin Zoth, the leader of the Yrdil Empire. His holographic image flickered to life in front of the command station, standing tall and imposing, even as an illusion. "But you've made a grave mistake." Elius's heart skipped a beat. "Velkrin was here. We knew you'd try something like this," Velkrin continued, his voice smooth like ice. "But you are not strong enough to defeat us. Even if you take down one ship, the Empire will crush you. Humanity will always be beneath us." Elius's eyes locked onto the hologram. His voice was steady, but beneath it, there was a fire that had only grown with each word Velkrin spoke. "You're wrong," Elius said. "We may not have the power you do, but we have something you'll never understand. We fight to protect everything we love. That makes us stronger than you'll ever be." The hologram flickered as if Velkrin was growing impatient, but Elius didn't flinch. He pressed the final button on the console. The command center trembled, alarms blaring in response. The Yrdil's network began to shut down, systems flashing red as they lost control. "You've lost," Elius said coldly. There was a brief moment of silence, and then, with the screech of failing technology, the Yrdil flagship began to buckle under the weight of its disabled systems. The connection to their fleet went dark, their communication and coordination shattered. The power to continue the assault faltered, and for the first time since the battle began, Elius allowed himself to breathe. "Mission accomplished," Hall said quietly, her voice a mix of exhaustion and relief. As the team stood there, the hum of the Yrdil flagship slowly grew faint, the once immense power of the Empire waning. Earth's fight wasn't over, but for the first time, humanity had struck a decisive blow. The fight was far from finished, but for the first time in this battle, Earth had hope, and that hope, like a spark, began to ignite.